Chioma Onyewuchi is the founder and director of Heart and Heritage Center, an alternative, experiential, and outdoor experience for homeschoolers in the greater Houston, Texas area that focuses on childhood creativity, curiosity, and a deep connection to African heritage. Chioma was born and raised in Aba, Nigeria, and came to the United States for college, where she graduated summa cum laude from Fairleigh Dickinson University with a bachelor's degree in psychology. Before launching Heart and Heritage, Chioma worked as a freelance writer and editor in several different genres, including technology, lifestyle, and children's publishing. Chioma, welcome to the Liberated podcast.
Thank you, Carrie. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you here. I want to hear all about Heart and Heritage Center and kind of your initial launch that's scheduled for this fall as you kind of start small and scrappy with your vision and then hopefully move into a much more kind of formal and established program as interest grows. And I think it's just a really interesting founder's journey that you have that so many of my listeners and viewers could relate to. But before we get into Heart and Heritage, I'd love to hear more about your background, your education growing up in Nigeria, and then how you discovered this whole world of alternative education, learner-centered education. Tell us a little bit about your background and pathway there.
Sure. So I was born and raised in Aba, which is a city in Nigeria, until I came to the US at age 18 for college. So I had a very conventional education. I went to just a regular school. It was a private school, but it was a very conventional education, and it was great in many ways. What I will say about education in Nigeria is there are high expectations for what students can achieve, which is something that I plan on carrying with me into the center, which is great. At the same time, there is a rigidity, which I think is pervasive in most conventional education settings, where many children don't have a chance to really follow their curiosity or creativity, and it's often very standardized, very much one size fits all. And it's something that honestly I didn't really think much about until I became a mother. So when I gave birth to my son, Kenne, I looked at this child in my arms and felt like everything literally changed for me. I started to question everything around me, including conventional ideas on even what parenting was supposed to look like, and the relationship you have with a child and the relationship a child has with the world. And then, of course, after thinking of who you are as a parent, the next thing is where your child is going to get an education. So my interest was turned towards schools. So I had been a tutor pretty much all my life. Even as a child, I was a peer tutor for my classmates. So I had always really, really enjoyed just guiding people through the learning process and helping people discover their inner genius, because I believe everybody can learn. We're just all different in the ways we do that and in the things we're interested in, because we're all different. But when I looked at my son before my daughter was born, I started looking around to see what was happening in education. And the first thing I stumbled on was Montessori. That was my first introduction to something that was just out of the box for me. I had never seen this environment where children were trusted in any sense with learning, were given this very tactile experience with learning, where people would sit and actually observe a child first instead of seeing a child as an empty box and just like stuffing information into them, actually seeing here's a person with an individual spirit, and how do we guide that person through? So it kind of blew my mind when I first discovered Montessori. And then I found something else. I found the Reggio Emilia approach, which was, for me, even more interesting, because now it even opened wider towards like allowing children to be more creative, where Montessori can in its own way be rigid sometimes. I found Reggio to be even more open to children's imagination. The whole idea of the 1,000 languages of children, or 100 or 1,100 languages of children, and just how there are multiple intelligences. And then from there, it literally became a rabbit hole for me. And then I started to discover all these new amazing ideas. And I knew that this was what I wanted for my child. And then I had my daughter almost 2 years later. And now I had two really important reasons to want to do something different in the world.
I love that story, Chioma. So your children are now 10 and 8.
Yes.
And you had told me before we started recording that they were both in conventional public schools up
Yes.
until 2020. Was that because there wasn't sort of access to Montessori or Reggio Emilia programs around you? Were you still sort of in the early stages of discovering that? I guess, how did that education decision come about to send them to public schools?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, one was a household difference, I guess, because for a lot of Nigerians, a conventional education is pretty much the only choice and the only thing most people are exposed to. So it had to take a lot of convincing with their dad, for instance, to try something different. But I will say my son did, both of my children went to Montessori for a short time in preschool. But I would say one of them was an amazing program, and the other one, looking back, was Montessori in name only, I would say. So they had the materials and they had all of the things, but the actual philosophy of observing children and guiding them and even time in the outdoors was not there. So that's another thing that I think you'll find is sometimes people have a philosophy that's in name only, but not, in action.
Yeah. And so then you started homeschooling them in 2020. Was that related to the COVID pandemic and school closures? Or I guess, how did you ultimately at that point make the shift or convince the children's dad perhaps that, that it was time to make a shift into a more unconventional learning environment?
I would say it was, in a way, it was both. I would say more than anything else, it was courage, because I think it was this time, I think for everyone, where things were turned upside down and you got to really sit with yourself and reevaluate what you thought was or was not working, and see that everyone else was struggling with the same questions you were. And then in some cases, seeing, up close what was happening in a traditional school environment and maybe not being comfortable with either how it was done, or actually watching your child's interaction and seeing how they were struggling, or maybe seeing in real time that this was not an experience that they were enjoying in the way that you might have wanted for them. Because for me as a parent, my ultimate goal is for my children to keep the light in their eyes, is the best way I can think of putting it, in so many ways. And I think we have this imposition on children as adults that we almost forget that they're people, just like we are. We almost treat them like another species of human, when they're people just like we are, and actually more vulnerable people than we are, who really need a certain level of care in their environment. And I think that's something education should provide for them, in addition to our ideas of learning, which learning happens all the time, every single time. We should also remember that there's a certain care that they need that I think can often be missing in the rigidity and the constant testing and just the anxiety inducing environment sometimes that conventional education can provide.
So were you aware of the sort of rigidity and constant testing in the conventional system before 2020? Or what was it about kind of seeing their classroom experience up close through Zoom school and remote learning during those shutdown periods that prompted you really to make a change? What did you find striking there?
I would say I always knew, of course, because it had always been my goal from the beginning to not have them in that environment. But just to see during that time of people struggling and children, struggling, and then still having the expectation of them still being rigid in many ways, especially at a time that was just heavy for everyone, that I found to be really tough. Because even hearing things like still parents being threatened with like truancy when their children aren't showing up because they're having a hard time. Everyone is having a really hard time. So like the refusal almost to put children's real human emotional needs and real needs, and just setting that aside and just like separating the brain from the rest of the body, which is just not what it means to be a human or a living being, was just really upsetting.
So you said that you were kind of always thinking about this path, that you had always hoped for your kids to have a more unconventional learner-centered environment in which to learn. And then COVID sort of provided that catalyst to make a change, that opportunity. At what point did you decide this is great, but I want to be an education entrepreneur? So that, I guess, that making that shift from a homeschooling parent, where I imagine you were able to kind of incorporate a lot of that learner-centered philosophy into your everyday living and learning with your kids, to then saying, I want to bring other people into this. I want to create a small business around this and really create a service to other families in my community who value the same educational approach.
I would say, again, something that had been percolating at the back of my mind for years, but it's terrifying in many ways. You know, starting a business on any level can be scary. You have all of these internal questions that you have to fight through. But for me, I think it became more about the vision and what it is that I do want to provide and what I feel personally is missing, which is, you know, the thing that I offer that I think is completely different, which is a learner-centered education that is very creative and includes African heritage in a way that is very free and creative and contemporary, I would say, because sometimes things that even involve, you know, Africa many times focus on the ancient and traditional, which is of course beautiful and timeless, but seems to forget that Africa still exists and it's, you know, still very contemporary, and there's so much going on in, for instance, contemporary art and design that can be married to so many other disciplines. And I feel that I'm bringing something that is very different to the table, and I'm excited for people to see that.
Yeah, and you've already, even though you're kind of early on in this startup journey as an education entrepreneur, you've already made some great progress. You have a beautiful website,
Thank you.
heartandheritage.center, that really lays out this learner-centered educational philosophy and approach, this commitment to African culture and heritage, real, goal around teaching and sharing skills of entrepreneurship and critical thinking and problem solving. So just such an attractive mission. And I wonder if you can share a little bit about where you are now in the startup process.
Sure. So right now, I'm going to start by offering outdoor classes in a park because one, children, I think, COVID was something that I think showed people that children actually really enjoy outdoor places as places of learning. So my goal is to begin in my local park, which is somewhere that's extremely accessible. It's a place that is inviting for children and where children can be hands-on and really build community with each other, where they can include play, and then incorporate classes that involve hands-on making. For instance, my daughter, who just turned 8, has been able to hand sew, like no machines, but hand sew 2 dresses by herself, just with a little bit of encouragement and imagination. She's been able to make a bag out of fabrics. So these are all things that I want to share with people who maybe don't know that children can be trusted to try some new things, and also to share things like authentic African fabrics and materials with them. So a very tactile way of introducing this to them without lecturing, but just showing them the materials, showing them this, you know, beautiful things that they can make with their hands, and also having a place-based education where my big goal is to be able to have a mini bus or a van that takes children around the Houston area, because there's so much beauty in Houston, and beyond Houston, there's so many parks, there's so many nature reserves, there's so many businesses that I think the children would really benefit from seeing up close. So these are some of my visions and practical things that I would love to share through my program.
Well, I mean, I love everything about the program vision. And what I really love is that you are diving right in with kind of an outdoor, more informal program for local families who are attracted to your mission and vision, but doing it in sort of a low cost, low overhead way. You know, finding space is often a huge challenge for
Yes.
education entrepreneurs, particularly when you're in that kind of pre-launch stage where you're just starting to build up your community and seeing who's interested in what you have to offer. And to sign a lease for some space could feel just really overwhelming, and in some
Yes.
cases just not possible at all. So to start by building that community, and then move into a space. And it actually reminds me of another Texas education entrepreneur who's been on the podcast. That's Amber Okolo Abube in the kind of Fort Worth area of Texas, who started off running an outside homeschool co-op in the spring of 2022. And then that ended up growing again, so many families loving that kind of outdoor interaction, consistent community, that grew into kind of a full-fledged micro school. She ended up leasing a large building. So I love what's happening in Texas generally around these unconventional education entrepreneurs, and also recognizing that this is a really important and often hugely helpful way of getting going, is just not waiting for the perfect space to come and figuring out how to afford the rent, but just saying, let's start, let's just get going, see who's interested, and go from there. Is that sort of what? Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, were you hoping to launch with a center, and then shifted, kind of pivoted to this model, or what was that entrepreneurial experience like?
I would say I joined a group called Arrow, Alternative Education Resource Organization, which I know you just spoke at. They're amazing. The founder has been doing this for, Jerry has been doing this for decades, really, supporting people with becoming education founders. And so I was really lucky to get into the program, the School Founders Program, which they're offering again soon, actually. And I was able to be mentored through it. And I met someone named her, she's Dr. Mesa Basna, who has a school in New York called Pono. And I had always, when I first found out about her years ago, I loved what she was doing. And she had this beautiful outdoor program, which she started without a space as well, where she takes the children to different places around the city. And that seemed very much like it. Just finding her was just confirmation. Wow, this is exactly what I would like to offer. So meeting with her, and through her mentorship, I was able to learn that this was something I could do. It's small and it's scrappy, but it's also something that many parents are actually looking for, because again, as we talk often about the environment and what's happening, we know that children who spend more time outside they have greater well-being in general, and they're going to grow up to be people who have all these great memories of being outdoors, which will also, affect how they care about the environment in the future. And my children specifically love being outdoors, and I just felt like it was a beautiful way to marry all of these amazing interests while being scrappy and small, because it really isn't financially feasible for me to sign a lease right now. But at the same time, I love the benefits of the outdoors, and just the way that people can build a community. Because say after a class, people want to stay behind and just play with have other children play. People don't feel like they have to like leave the space immediately. People can really try to build community in that way. So I'm excited by the things I see as less limitations, but actually more robust advantages of being outside.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. And you mentioned Jerry Mintz, the founder of Arrow, the alternative education resource organization that he founded in 1989. I've had Jerry on the podcast. And then Mesa Basna, the founder of Pono, New York City's first outdoor democratic education experience and program. And I've also had Mesa on the show, and just think so highly of everything that they're doing, and think that they're just wonderful inspiration. And clearly you've benefited from their experience and vision as well. So, Choma, you're really at pre-launch. I mean, you're looking to start kind of mid-September when that
Yes.
Texas sun is a little bit less searing.
Yes.
And what are you sensing from the community? Is there budding interest yet in what you're offering?
Yes, there is budding interest, and I am also, from beginning this week, I'm going to use more social media to talk about what I'm doing, just so that more people, because I have shared it some Facebook groups, and there has been initial interest that people have shared in it. So I know as I talk more about what I'm doing and more people come to find out, I think there will be much more interest in what I'm doing, because I really do feel that what I'm doing is completely different. It's this marriage that I don't think I've ever seen happen, of just a truly learner-centered education that's also experiential and also marries African cultures as well. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, and do you see it as starting off as a 1 day a week, sort of weekly program for homeschoolers and building from there, or what do you expect the fall will hold?
Well, I will definitely start with 1 day a week, but I actually hope that if there's enough interest, we can build up to 3 days a week. But that's ultimately my goal. And then from there, really, who knows? Like I have such a big vision for what I'm hoping to provide. So from arts and culture to food to STEM to even hopefully in the future travel to African countries where the children can do some hands-on learning and experience the African continent in a whole new way.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that. And are you really, sort of targeting learners who have kind of an African background? Is this open to kind of multicultural learners? What is your sense of the student composition?
Yeah, well, my sense is honestly just because of the African heritage, I do expect to get much more interest in people who are either from the African continent or its diaspora, which is African American, Caribbean, continental African. But I'm completely open to anyone who is interested in learning about new cultures and actually just a new way of being, because we have an entire world that is diverse and made of people from everywhere, and it can never hurt to find out more about other people's cultures. And again, these are very hands-on things that are transferable across everything. If you learn to design a tote bag, for instance, and figure out the shape or size using unconventional materials, you can carry that with you if you become an engineer in 10 years designing something else. So I think these are skills that they can learn and will last a lifetime.
Oh, I'm just so excited for what you're building and what this
Thank
could
you.
become. What are you sensing in the greater Houston area and Texas more generally in terms of homeschooling, interest in unconventional learning models, particularly over the past 3 years since the COVID school shutdowns in 2020? What are you seeing there?
Oh, I'm seeing that it's growing. There is more and more interest. And I think COVID really, like I said, people actually seeing either the way that their children were struggling or seeing that they could do things they didn't think they could do around children's education, because your child was home for all this time and you realized you were actually able to manage and you were actually able to give them an education in ways that you might not have had. And just there's really a big boost in resources out there as well. More people sharing with other parents the things that they're doing and they have done. And I think Texas is one of the easiest, if not the easiest place to homeschool in the country. And I think there's just been a lot going on coming out of Texas when it comes to unconventional education models. And I think that is only going to continue to grow, unless, of course, if there are changes that take place in the conventional education centers where ideally children really do feel, I don't know, I feel like school should be a place where children wake up excited to go every single day, because they feel like it's a place not only that they can learn, that they can explore and be themselves in a very embodied way. So I hope that one day in the future that's something we can say. But right now, I'm glad that there's so many of us out here trying to offer different things.
So still holding out hope that the conventional schools can shift to become more learner-centered, to embrace some of these unconventional approaches to education. But until that, you have a 10-year-old and 8-year-old and others in your
Yes.
community that you have to think about, and you
Yes.
want to provide them with this beautiful educational experience that will help them to flourish as individuals. And I think that's great to see. So I'd love to get back, Chioma, to talking about some of the basics around startup. At what point and how will you know that you're ready to sign that lease on a space? I mean, I guess, what are the kind of startup economics for you as an education entrepreneur?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think my goal is to keep it small and intimate. So I'm hoping to be able to serve no more than 15 students at first, at least. That's my goal, just because I think too big and you lose a sense of community. But of course, that doesn't mean that if other people elsewhere are inspired by what I'm doing, I would love to see people, actually, even on the African continent, try to do this, because again, given our history and all the things that have happened on the African continent, I think there's just this very narrow idea of what an education is now that wasn't there before. Because even from a historical perspective, most learning was very hands-on, extremely hands-on learning. So I'm hoping that maybe seeing something like this will inspire other people to reach out and maybe take charge in their own communities and find ways that they can do the same for their children.
I love that. So paying it forward as well, that
Yes.
even as you're still in this early stage of building this center and it's starting more as this outdoor learning experience, you're thinking ahead to eventually this being replicable, scalable in terms of other people seeing what you're doing and realizing that they can do the same thing in their own
Yes.
way and in their own communities. So, Chioma, you mentioned that homeschooling is easy to do in Texas. I would also say that opening a private school in Texas is easier than it is in many other states. So you have that going for you. Do you ultimately want to become a private school when you have a center to be recognized as a private school, or do you want more of this kind of homeschool-based micro school environment? I guess, have you thought about that at all in terms of structure?
I think I would like to keep it more as a micro school, because I want it to be something where parents don't feel that if they want to travel, for instance, with their children, they don't feel that they're tied down to having to take attendance, with me in this place. So I want it to be like a beautiful marriage of a really robust, comprehensive education, and at the same time where families have time to do whatever they need to do as a family. If today they need to take the day off, if they have sensitive children or children who have neurological differences or just children who need a break, they can do that without feeling penalized in any way.
Really, really important point that choosing to operate as a homeschool-based micro school instead of a recognized private school provides that freedom and flexibility that, of course, homeschoolers often enjoy, to sort of bypass those compulsory schooling statutes that require certain hours of seat time and all of the rigidity that goes with time on task in a conventional schooling environment, and that prevents, like you said, family travel or taking time off when children's interests and needs demand that. And so I think that's such an important point. So, as you get ready to launch now, only a few weeks away, what are some of your biggest anxieties, apprehensions? How are you feeling now? What are some of the kind of key emotions?
I would say nerves and excitement at the same time. So I'm really excited to see what can happen when people discover that I exist and these classes exist. At the same time, I'm of course nervous, because I want to make sure that I'm providing the best possible option for the people that I will serve. I want to make sure that people find out, enough people who need classes like mine know that I exist. So from a marketing standpoint, of course, that's always the number one. Um, and but I'm also really excited because I know that it's something completely different. And There will be growing pains, as there always are, but I know that this is something that our community needs, and I'm excited to offer that to.
So, okay, let's imagine that it's 5 years from now. You have a beautiful space. Your program is in high demand. The children are thriving. You're kind of financially stable in terms of entrepreneurship, and you're kind of out of that startup stage as more of an established organization. And your children at that point would be 15 and 13. What do you see the program looking like for them at that point, kind of heading into those teen years?
I would say a lot more internships. I'm very much about getting real world experience. And so I would hope to build up on what I've done, and having them take internships in our community and all over the world, from the African continent to Europe, to Asia, to wherever there are opportunities, just having them follow their curiosities in very, very tangible, hands-on way, shadowing artisans, business people, entrepreneurs, and workers in whatever field that they're working in. So say a child might be interested in architecture, I would have that child hopefully shadow someone who works in an architecture studio to get hands-on experience and to see if that is something they would like to do or not, but also just gain those tangible skills that they can use as they advance through life.
Oh, I love it. I just can't wait to see that all come to fruition for you over the next few years. And in the meantime, Chioma, what advice do you have for anyone listening who might be in that either idea stage or kind of early pre-launch stage? What advice do you have for those aspiring education entrepreneurs?
My advice is to believe in your vision and to keep going, and to find mentors if you can. So I mentioned ARO, which is, again, Alternative Education Resource Organization. So if you're trying to build something unconventional, I would say that's a wonderful place to start. I would just say find mentors, find people who are doing the things you want, even if you're not speaking to them directly. Just by reading up on what they're doing and looking at their journey, it reminds you that they were once where you are, and if they could do it, then you can too.
Oh, I love that. I love that advice and inspiration for future entrepreneurs. And I am really excited to have you back on the podcast not too long from now, so we can hear about your progress and about how you go about ultimately getting a center in a defined location. But in the meantime, this more outdoor-based, nomadic kind of educational immersive experience, I think, just sounds so magical, and just wishing you well. So again, your website is heartandheritage.center. That's heartandheritage.center. And Chioma Onyewuchi, thank you so much for being on the Liberated podcast.
Thank you so much, Carrie. This was wonderful to be here. And thank you for what you do as well.